Okay, great. I think we'll crack on. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Richard Banks, as those of you who took part in this event this morning will probably remember, and I am fortunate to be here this afternoon for our afternoon session with Andrea Hasler. Andrea, good afternoon or good morning, because it's crack of dawn for you in DC, is that right?
Yes, exactly. It's 8 a.m., but we're an early riser here.
One thing, I was about to start swearing now, but I'm not going to. Zoom has brought into our lives is the ability people. So my first call this morning was at about 7 o'clock London time, and my last one is at about 8 o'clock at night, because it doesn't seem to matter that, because you're at home. So why can't you do a call in the morning? Anyway.
Exactly. We're online all the time. That's normal.
Bring back the hour-long commute and the proper live conference where you'd have to fly to Bahrain and hang out in the Four Seasons for a few days. That'd be nice. Anyway, enough.
I wouldn't mind that.
Yeah, really nice. Four Seasons Bahrain, great food, good place. Bahrain generally, we love it. So look, welcome everyone, and welcome Andrea. Andrea, you have an amazingly long title. But I'm going to read it out anyway. You're Assistant Research Professor in Financial Literacy and Deputy Academic Director of the GFLEC, I imagine that's what it's called, at the George Washington University. What is GFLEC?
GFLEC is the Global Financial Literacy Excellence Center. That's also awfully long. So that's why we call it GFLEC. And we were founded in 2011, as you mentioned, at the George Washington University School of Business. So we are here located in Washington, D.C., and we were founded by Professor Anna Maria Lusardi. So she started the whole field of financial literacy, the research around financial literacy, and also the measure of financial literacy that I'll be talking about today. And GFLEC is over the past 10 years. We have now this year, the 10-year anniversary. We have grown to become the leading research center in financial literacy globally. So with our research, we try to inform policy, but also programs. So programs in school, the workplace, but also the community. So that's what you can expect also from my presentation today.
Well, don't give it all away. Spoilers ahead. No, but and what's your? I mean, prior to obviously you are a big wheel in the world of financial literacy. But what was your background before you entered this laudable profession?
My background is I have a PhD in finance. I started off, as you might feel like, and here with my accent, I started off in Switzerland, Europe. I was also in New York a couple of years, and during my PhD studies, did some research there on retirement savings. And that basically led me into the field of financial literacy. And that's how I ended up here.
Well, absolutely fascinating. I'm meant to be here just simply to sort of move things on and to ask a few questions. So what I'm going to do is to shut up in a second and let you get on and give us the presentation, which I haven't seen it. I've seen the slides, so I know that it's interesting and it's colourful and it's got a lot of interesting and informative things. So we'll carry on with that in a second. Just for our audience, as always, there is a Q&A box. If you want to ask questions, just go ahead and ask them. We will have time at the end of the session for some questions. Ibrahim's very keen that I go on for as long as I want. Well, I want to go on for an hour because I think these things. None of us need any more Zoom in our lives, but we'll keep it punchy, we'll keep it direct, but I'm sure we'll learn a lot. So Andrea, without any further ado, I'm going to turn off my sound and vision, but I shall be listening, and over to you.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Richard. And also thank you, Ibrahim, for the opportunity to speak at your conference. I'm really excited. And I'll quickly share my screen so that you can see my presentation. So I'll have it up here. So I hope you can all see it. And with that, I'd like to start. And if something doesn't work, just please quickly let me know. So what I'd like to talk today about is about 3 questions that I will cover. So we will first start with how well equipped are people to make savvy financial decisions. So I talk about financial literacy and the financial literacy levels around the globe, but then also specifically for the US, because we do a lot of research here in the US. Then second, who are the most vulnerable? So who are the population, the subpopulation, the subgroups that know the least? And what are also the topics that people know the least? Because that's very important for us when we develop programs and initiatives. And then the third one is that's very more concrete, actionable steps. So what can we do? So what are the main components of holistic financial wellness initiatives? So that's the scheme of my presentation, and I'll dive in right away with our financial literacy measures. So we call it the ABC of personal finance, or also others have called it the big three. So we started many, many years ago, actually Professor Lusardi with her co-author at that time, she invented these three questions, which are very basic questions that test the concept, fundamental concepts of personal finance. And the fundamental concepts we are testing here is numeracy, so the understanding of interest, inflation, and risk diversification. And you see here, for example, with the very first question, it asks, suppose you had $100 in a savings account and the interest rate was 2% per year. After 5 years, how much do you think you would have in the account if you left the money to grow? And you see already with the possible answers that we provide, you're not asking about compound interest. We're not asking about whether the amount is more than 102. We ask whether the amount is more than 110, excuse me. But we ask whether the amount is more than 102, or exactly 102, or less than 102. So these are really, these questions try to grasp the fundamental concept. The second one is about inflation, and the third one is about risk diversification. And there we say, do you think the following statement is true or false? Buying a single company stock usually provides a safer return than a stock mutual fund. And that's the question, or in general, risk diversification and risk is the concept that's the most difficult for people to understand and to grasp. So that's just how do we measure financial literacy? And these are concepts, or these are questions that have been included in surveys all around the world. And speaking about around the world, we actually also did a global survey. So it was funded by S&P Global in 2014, and it was a joint project with Gallup and the World Bank. And it is the largest, most comprehensive and global measure of financial literacy, because we asked these financial literacy questions to more than 150,000 adults, age 15 plus, in more than 148 countries. And because we asked the same question in all these countries, we can actually compare across the globe. And of course, because the countries are different, the systems are different, the financial markets are a little different, so we have to tweak the wording of the question slightly, but the concept that we try to assess was still the same. So we actually added here, I have to say, we added to the questions that I showed you before, we added compound interest. So we had the numeracy question, inflation and risk diversification, and we added a fourth one. But when we measured financial literacy, or the percentage of the population who are financially literate, we said that they had to be able to answer 3 out of these 4 questions correctly to be classified as financially literate. And how does it look around the globe? It's like this. So the darker blue the country, the more people, the higher the percentage of people who could answer 3 out of the 4 questions correctly. But as you can see here, it's very light blue all around the globe. So we call it also the Flat World Project, because the world is really flat when it comes to financial literacy, because on average, only 1 in 3 adults worldwide could respond correctly to 3 out of the 4 questions that I showed you before. So only 33% around the globe are classified with our measure as being financially literate. So these are global findings that I brought you today. And maybe for you, I quickly looked it up. So in Bahrain, it was 40%. So 40% in 2014 of people that could answer 3 out of the 4 topics correctly. Now, next, I'd like to talk a little bit about another survey that we did here in the US. So it's all US-based data that I will be talking about in the remainder of my project or my presentation, because this is the data that we have been collecting all on a yearly basis. So it's an annual barometer of knowledge and understanding. And the latest data that I just collected was this January 2021. And that's exactly the data that I'd like to present today, because that's the most recent that I have. And what we have as well is we have financial well-being indicators in that data set as well. And what's really unique is that we have not only 3 or 4 questions that measure financial literacy, we have actually 28 questions. So 28 questions, and that we combine to we call it personal finance index, that measure financial literacy in 8 functional areas. So we ask questions around topics of earning, saving, consuming, investing, borrowing, insuring, but also comprehending risk, and then what information sources people use when they go and make financial decisions. So this is actually the most comprehensive measure of financial literacy, because it is based on 28 questions. That's what's very unique with that data set that we are collecting. And as I said, we collected every year. So we started in 2017. We have now 5 years of our data. We have a report. Everything is online. Please feel free to go to our website. We have a special page just for this data and the findings. And also what we are doing is every year we oversample a population. So it started with Hispanics. Then we also oversampled millennials, the young. We oversampled Blacks, African Americans, and women. And this year, actually, the oversample report that will come out later this year will again speak about Hispanics and Blacks. Now, how does it look? How does financial literacy in the US look? And how has it been over the last 5 years? And you can see here the percentages in the bars say how, on average, how many questions were answered correctly. So you can see over these 5 years, around 50% of the 28 questions were answered correctly. So that means around 14 questions out of 28 questions, and that's clearly a failing grade. So there is really a lack of financial literacy, financial knowledge, and we find widespread financial illiteracy. We can now also look at the distribution. So the distribution is actually what are the percentages of people who could only answer up to 7 questions correctly. So these are the people who know the least or have the lowest financial knowledge. And we see that this is around 1/5 of the population. So 20% could only answer up to 7 questions correctly, up to 7 questions out of 28. On the other hand, if you look at the very top, we see that around 20% again could actually show very high financial knowledge. So they could answer correctly 22 to 28 questions out of the whole sample, the whole index of 28 questions. So we have this distribution that shows there is 1/5 of the population at the very low end, 1/5 at the very high end, but the bulk is actually in the middle. And that leads us to saying that on average, only 50% of the questions could be answered correctly. Now, when we look into the different topics, that's very important for us too, because when we shape programs or when we look at how do we need to develop, what topics do we need to include in financial education programs, then it is important to know what do people know the most and what do they know the least. So we have these 8 topics, and we know, as you can see, 61% of the questions out of the borrowing category, the borrowing functional area, were answered correctly in 2021 among the US adult population. And that makes sense, because if you think that we are confronted with credit card from a very early age on, or also here in the US we have student loans. So to fund our education, college education, we need to take up we need to take up money if it's not provided by the family. So that means kids as early as after high school have to take out student loans. And that's why we think people are much more knowledgeable about topics around borrowing. But what's very worrisome is the very bottom, comprehending risk. So people have trouble understanding concepts of risk diversification. And it's not just around investments, as I've shown you before, where we talk about single stock or stock mutual funds. Here we have actually different risk questions in the PFIN index data. It's not just about investing. And what we added actually this year specifically was we wanted to understand whether people know about the risk measures, about probability measures that we have been talking about for the past year. Because of COVID, the pandemic, in the media and among us, we have been talking about the probability of getting a disease, of getting the disease, or also the probability of effectiveness of the vaccine and so on. So we added this particular question here just to understand whether people understand those concepts. So the question was, which of the following indicates the highest probability of getting a particular disease? And the possible answers were, there is a 1 in 20 chance of getting the disease. 2% of the population will get the disease. Third option was 25 out of every 1,000 people will get the disease, and then don't know and refuse to answer. And what we saw with the results are that 28% got it correct. Around 20%, 19% were incorrect. But what was actually very shocking is 53%, so more than half of the population said, I don't know. So now I'd like to talk about who knows the least. So when we look at different demographics, we see that the percentage of PFIN questions that were answered correctly increases with college education. So we see that college divide here. So the people who have a college degree could answer 65% of the PFIN questions correctly, compared to those who have less than a high school degree, which is around a third. Then as well, PFIN questions answered correctly, so people showed more financial knowledge the higher their income level. And also, when we looked at employed or unemployed or retired, we see that big divide. And I talk about retired or the age, whether we can gain more financial knowledge by learning by doing in just a few slides. Then we also look at gender gaps. So we see clearly that women have lower financial literacy rates than men. And that's not just in the US. I have studies that show that also uses the global survey that I told you before about, and that show that there is a gender gap all around the world. And we see here in the US, we have women could answer 46% of the questions correctly versus men 55%. And I just brought for you, because I showed that before, the distribution as well. So you can clearly see that at the bottom, there are more women who show very low financial literacy rates compared to men. And then at the very top, men show much more high financial knowledge compared to women. So it's always also interesting to look at the distribution, because we see such a variation within one demographic group. Then we also look here in the US at racial and ethnic groups. So we see that historically underrepresented minorities have lower financial literacy rates. So this is Blacks and Hispanics could answer around 40% of the PFIN questions correctly, and that is a big gap to the white population, who could answer over 55%. And again, we see very clearly here the distribution at the very bottom. We have a really big percentage of people who cannot answer more than 7 questions correctly. And I spoke a little bit before already about the age and generations. So we see, as you can see here, that financial literacy increases with age. So we have at on the very left, we have Generation C, the youngest. Then we have Generation Y, Millennials, X, Baby Boomers, and Silent Generation. So it increases with age. Financial literacy increases with age, but it increases very, very slowly. So if you see that only 43% of the questions were answered correctly among the youngest, but among the oldest, it's still only 55%. And if you think that at an older age, we have done so many financial decisions already, which will have lifelong consequences. So 55% is still a very, very low financial literacy rate compared to the decisions we have to make. So it is not that learning by doing will actually help us increase our financial literacy rates a lot. So that's why we say we need to couple it with financial education and financial education programs, because financial literacy rates are too low. So we have to make joint efforts and raise financial literacy rates all across all generations. Now you might think, good, financial literacy, I get the concept, so why is this important? And that's actually the next part I'd like to talk about. So for us, or for me, financial literacy is like the water in an ecosystem. So it is one of many ingredients that we need for one's life, financial life to flourish. It is one ingredient because there are so many other factors that play into it as well, but it is an essential component because it's like the water. So it's a foundation that helps everything to grow. Now I show you in the next slide why it makes such a big difference. So first of all, we asked in our survey as well, how confident or how certain are you that you could come up with $2,000 if an unexpected need arose within the next month? So you have 30 days. There is an emergency, an emergency of $2,000. So how certain are you that you could come up with the $2,000? And I've done a lot of research around this question. We call it the people who cannot come up with the $2,000 within 30 days. We call them as being financially fragile, because we are not asking whether people have $2,000 on their bank account. Because we are asking, how could you come up over the next 30 days with the $2,000? So it could actually be that you can sell something, or you can put it on your credit card if this limit allows, or you can tap into your network of family and friends. So it's really that capacity of how constrained are you in terms of your entire balance sheet. And what I show here in the bars are the percentage who could come up with $2,000 if an unexpected need arose within the next month. And on the very left, I have the people who know the least. So the people who could answer only up to 7 questions correctly. So, and that's on the very left. On the very right, I have the people with the highest financial knowledge. Those who could answer 22 to 28 questions correctly. And you see how it increases. So the people on the very left who show the lowest financial literacy rates, only 24% could come up with $2,000 if an unexpected need arose within the next month. But those who have the highest financial literacy rate, among those, 75% could certainly come up with the $2,000. So that means those with greater financial literacy are less likely to be financially fragile. The same is shown here with a different question. So we asked, how does your debt and debt payments prevent you from adequately addressing other financial priorities? So, and we have here, I show here the other way around. So basically the percentage of people who have debt and debt payments who do not, so those debt and debt payments do not prevent them from adequately addressing financial priorities. So they have the financial freedom to actually have other financial goals and are not debt constrained. So among those with the lowest financial literacy, only 29% could say, I'm not debt constrained. But among, if you compare to the very right, those with the highest financial literacy rate, again, around 75% said, oh, I'm not constrained by my debt or debt payments. So again, those with greater financial literacy are less likely to be debt constrained. I bring another, just to make the point clear, I bring another question where we ask who, the question is, how difficult is it for you to make ends meet in a typical month? And again, I took here the question, the flip side of the question, and asked, and show the percentage of people who say, I do not find it difficult to make ends meet in a typical month. And you see, again, those with low financial literacy, there is a much, much lower percentage of people who said, it is not difficult for me to make ends meet in a typical month compared to the other side. So making ends meet is easier for those with greater financial literacy. So we have shown the short-term consequences, debt constraint, making ends meet, so the short-term cash flow. Now, how does it look for long-term consequences? And again, here we ask whether people save on a regular basis for their retirement. And we see again, those here I only show two, the two extreme bars. So those with very low financial literacy and those with very high financial literacy rates. And we see that big gap, that people with more financial literacy are more likely to save for retirement on a regular basis. And now you might think, okay, but those with low financial literacy rates might not have enough, or might not have enough financial means, so might not have enough money to actually save for retirement. That's why I have here another graph that I brought, because we are also asking, have you ever tried to figure out how much you need to save for retirement? So we are not asking whether you do save, but we ask whether you have ever thought about and ever planned about retirement savings. And here again, we see that big divide between those who have low financial literacy and those who have high financial literacy rates. So those with greater financial literacy are more likely to save and plan for retirement. That's the conclusion. So now we come to the last part. So what do we learn from our research? So we need to build effective programs because financial literacy levels are really low. So we need to improve knowledge of the ABCs of personal finance that we have seen before. Then we also know that the young are an important group, and the important group, why? Because they have very low financial literacy rates, but at the same time, they can also use time in their favor. So I always say the most important asset that we have is actually time, because with time, money grows, money works for us because of compound interest. So we can invest, if you invest early on, especially for retirement savings, that amount, because not only the amount that we invest, but also the interest will be reinvested every year. We have actually a series build up over time on interest. So that's why we advocate for starting very early in school on with programs, but also with programs in the workplace, because financial literacy and financial decision making is something that accompanies us over the entire lifetime. And so that's why it's not just that we can do it once, we really have to do it on a continuous basis. And then another thing is we see that women are vulnerable. So also targeting groups, subpopulation like women or minorities to really help build financial literacy. Then what we have also seen are that some topics are particularly complex. So like risk and risk diversification, so focusing on these topics is important as well. And then I'll talk about that in a couple of slides, is to focus not only on a single topic, like for example, retirement savings, but having a holistic approach to personal finance. Because what I've shown before, when I showed you all these connections between financial well-being and financial literacy, we actually went through everything. We started with short-term financial consequences, and debt and debt management is also very important. But then also the long-term, right, retirement savings or making ends meet. So all these decisions are interlinked. So that's why it is important to have a holistic approach. And then personalized programs. So the one size does not fit all approach. It really is what we need to do here, because I said one size does not fit all. So we need to tailor and target the programs to the specific audience. And I'll talk about that in the next slides. And then also what we see with our research is that we cannot just mandate it in schools, because then the teachers, when we talked about that with teachers, then they said, yes, it is great, I will support that, but I don't feel confident in actually teaching personal finances because I'm struggling with my personal finances as well. So that's why we say we need to have a robust intervention, which also includes teacher training, so that they feel confident and comfortable teaching it in schools. So given the widespread financial illiteracy, we say that we need large and scalable programs that can be in school, in the workplace, but also in communities. So financial education in, for example, libraries or museums, theaters, or other places where people go and learn. And I can talk about this maybe a little later. We have that International Federation for Finance Museums, which is actually something that connects museums all around the world, which are dedicated to teach personal finance. Now, I'd like to just in the last couple of minutes, I'd just like to talk about what are components, universal components of effective financial education initiatives that I think need to be included in programs to be effective, for them to be effective. And everything always starts with an assessment, because what I said before, one size doesn't fit all, and we have to tailor the programs. So first, we have to figure out what are the needs and concerns of our participants. So what do we need to include in the program? But also for the participant to actually raise awareness. So what we usually do is to have a financial checkup to measure financial knowledge, but also capability. It is sort of, if you will, that's why I have that picture there. It's similar to when individuals go to see a doctor for a regular checkup, so that financial education program providers can help their participants assess their financial health and raise awareness and see where there are areas that need improvement and where there are areas that they lack, or also where there are areas where they do well, so that they know, okay, that's not of my concern, but I have to work on, for example, my debt management practices or so. And then with that assessment, what's also very helpful for providers, program providers, is that with that service, we can actually take that survey, to segment participants into the different types of financial education programs to make it really targeted to their needs and level of financial knowledge, so that you have specific groups and okay, that person needs or lacks that financial knowledge in that specific area. So here are the resources that are best tailored and address exactly that particular case. So that's why I think an assessment, or not why I think, but that's why we advocate for an assessment at the very beginning, before even a program has been developed. And then, of course, with a survey, you can always track progress over time and measure the effectiveness on a regular basis. Then, as I said before, address larger financial strategies. So we build a holistic approach for financial wellness programs, because many financial decisions are interrelated. And as you have seen before, when I had the connections between financial literacy and wellness, I always went through actually the entire balance sheet, if you will, of a person's personal finances. So here as well. So the foundation is basic financial literacy, right? So there is the concept, the understanding of the concept of numeracy of compound interest. But then also the topics should talk, or the program should talk about the topic of precautionary savings, having emergency savings. The $2,000 question that I mentioned before, for example, is a nice measure, or just to see whether people could cope with a short-term expense. And that's here. So basically the second layer or building block talks about precautionary savings. And the third is about debt and debt management, because this is really something that we see even among the older generations here in the US, that they struggle a lot with debt and still have a lot of debt, and that restricts their financial well-being at an older age. And then the last building block is the planning for the future. So retirement planning and everything that's more long-term. So these are basically that's our holistic approach to personal finance. And we advocate for including all these different topics in financial education initiatives. Then one other thing that's very important is the timing. So the program needs to be timely, because what we've seen with our research is the more not only targeted the program, but also targeted to the specific needs the person is facing at the very moment. So if I have a financial decision to make, for example, I'd like to buy a house, then I need all the information on mortgages and on how to finance my home purchase. So it is really time. It really I need that information at that particular moment, and not earlier or later. Otherwise, people are not paying that much attention and are not engaged. That's what we have seen with our research. And so the program should be provided at critical moments. And also what we are saying right now, so that the current crisis is actually one of these teachable moments, because what we have seen over the past year is having emergency savings is really crucial. Then the fourth component is making it easy to understand and to participate. So simplify the financial decisions. You see here on the right-hand side, that's a program we created for the Dartmouth College, their employees, their staff and faculty, to sign up on a supplemental retirement account. And we made it really, really easy, just 7 easy, simple steps to complete the application. So it is really that step-by-step action guide that's needed to get over that initial hurdle of, oh, this is too complicated. This is a very big decision, because people don't understand what to do and so breaking it down in very simple steps, basically providing a manual for financial contracts products that are actionable and making it simple and avoid financial jargon. So we have them on our website, for example. That's another project we did where we did small little or short, I shouldn't say small, but short videos that talk about these concepts like compound interest, inflation, risk diversification. It was targeted to millennials. So we had in those short videos, which were only up to 3 minutes, we didn't use financial jargon. And it was 2 young people talking about these concepts on a very casual basis. And that was very effective, what we have seen later on when we tested it. And also personalize as much as possible and make it relevant, what we talked about before. And the last point is really that evaluation component, because a program is only effective if you adjust it all the time, if you adjust it over time, and also show that it is impactful, so that people see, okay, it's actually important to implement it, to participate. And that we can do in a way that, of course, we repeat it on a regular basis, but also we evaluate it on a continual basis and assess the impact. And then adjust the program to increase effectiveness. So that's, in a nutshell, basically very quickly run through the 5, I think, very essential components of effective financial education initiatives. And I'm happy to talk about each and every component in more detail during the remainder of this presentation. And just to conclude, I think financial literacy is like reading and writing, so it's an essential skill to thrive in the 21st century. So because everyone needs to deal with finance, and finance is actually sufficiently complex that we cannot leave it to the individual to learn by him or herself. And it's very important to be financially literate as early as possible, as we have seen, because we already have, when we are really young, we have to face lifelong consequences and decisions that we have to make. And financial literacy is basically a stepping stone to financial well-being. And everybody needs to be involved in the ecosystem, and we have to engage everybody. That's basically, and I think my presentation is not up anymore, right?
It appears to have disappeared.
No, I didn't touch anything.
Neither did I.
We are back here, so that's good. I was at the very end, so just like to promote that everybody should, we can all be ambassadors for financial education. That's my final thought here. Thank you.
Brilliant. I assure you, Andrea, I didn't pull your presentation. I don't know what happened.
No, it's fine.
The Zoom goddess decided that you'd come to your end. The algorithm decided. Listen, thank you very much for condensing such a broad and interesting and important topic into precisely 35 minutes. I mean, if I didn't know you came from Germany, I'd say you came from Germany, because you did it to the second, which is fantastic. So that gives us about 20 minutes of chat. There's 4 or 5 questions. Sorry, I'm pointing to another screen. 4 or 5 questions, which I want to ask you. I have some questions, so I'm pretty sure we'll be able to have plenty to talk about. It certainly set me thinking. I think the first question I want to take, because I think it is the most relevant, is one from, and if I mispronounce your name, I'm sorry, is Zeni. And it says that financial literacy as a topic came up only relatively, well, recently. What's the backdrop for its emergence? So, I mean, you see where that's coming from. So perhaps just to sort of, what was the genesis of this, a focus of Professor Lusardi, of yourself, of GFLEC? Why did it suddenly come up as a thing? Is it that we didn't need to be so financially literate, or was it just that no one had ever really sort of paid any attention to it?
I think how it evolved here, I mean, in GFLEC, also with Anna Maria Lusardi's research a lot, but also mine, is that here in the US, and I know systems are quite different around the globe, is that when we save and plan for retirement, the responsibility lays with the within the individual. So, and over the past 25 to 30 years, everything has changed. So it started off, the retirement system here in the US, with defined benefit plans. So where the employer was actually responsible for to provide the benefits during retirement for their employees. And then everything has shifted to defined contribution plans, how we call it here, where the investment risk, but also the contribution risk, so how much do I contribute, all shifted from the employer to the employee. So there was much, much more responsibility on the employee now, on the individual. And I think that sparked the entire topic around, are people actually equipped to make these really large financial decisions? Because later on, when you turn 65 and you feel like, I have $20,000, but no, actually those $25,000 have to carry over the next 20 years. That's actually not enough. And I think that's where everything started, because also Anna Maria Lusardi's research started in retirement savings, my personal, where I just felt like, this is so much responsibility. Are people equipped to do that? And that's, I think, why financial literacy also came into play.
I mean, and of course we've seen, I mean, speaking of my own country, a similar migration from DB to DC, and from with some exceptions, but the provision, state pensions, good luck. Although that's not the public. Our politicians, my leaders would not say that, but that's basically what it is. It's not a living pension in any meaningful sense of the word. So similarly, over a generation, you've got to this point where you need to look after your own financial retirement future. But also, you mentioned that it's not just about retirement; it's about things like college funds and housing and rainy day. I don't know what the rainy day equivalent in Bahrain is, probably rainy day. It's just not as usual as we get here in England. But in fact, well, there's no such thing as rainy day savings in England. It's just raining the whole time. So it's sunny day. We're allowed to go outside. Sorry, going down a rabbit hole. But it's an interesting thing to see that. And I mean, is it, clearly in America, it's a very advanced thing. It's something that has been established. I know in the UK over time it's also been, but are you seeing it going in now? I mean, people waking up in what we used to call the emerging markets, the developing world, where perhaps the systems of retirement planning were either family oriented or state oriented. Are you seeing at your center more incoming inquiries from people in different countries?
Yeah, clearly. I think there are so many countries now that are working on national strategies for financial literacy, for example. But also, it's not just about, that's where our train of thought came from about the retirement savings. But for example, also financial inclusion, right? That's another topic where there are so many unbanked, especially in developing countries, so many unbanked people who do not have access to formal credit, for example. So with financial education, and so that's why we couple that with financial education, because once people know more about the system and have a better understanding, there is also that could also help with financial inclusion. So it's not just it's really it's not only about retirement savings where everything comes from. We really see all around the world that people really see the need for financial literacy, and that also that it can bring that empowerment, because I have to say over my personal finances, but also over my long-term financial well-being, so that I'm not that reliant on on outside factors, because I can plan. I'm able to plan and provide for myself, whether that's in the medium or also the long term.
That's an interesting point. Actually, I've noticed as my children have grown up and got jobs, they feel a lot more empowered when it's their own money. I mean, it's a trivial thing, but it's no longer the grumpy old dad saying how much those pair of shoes cost. And he said, well, it costs us what I like. I paid for it out of my, out of my salary. That's my son talking about the shoes, not my daughter.
but at the same time, sorry.
But no, come on.
But at the same time, what we also see is that's actually very overwhelming. So I did last year, right before the pandemic, I did a big workshop and focus groups with students here at GW, where I did a budgeting workshop, because budgeting is really, really important in my view, and especially with kids. I call them kids. I know they're 23, but who are about to graduate from college, because they are in a very in a more protected bubble with at the university, because as you say, you still have some financial support from your parents, for example. You can go back if something happens, but also GW or the university provides like funding or whether that's a scholarship. So it's a protected. But once you graduate, you have all these bills coming in, right? But you also a high salary. So we did those budgeting workshops, and we talked with students right after how they felt when they did those budgets, and most of them were like, I'm totally overwhelmed. So I see now how important it is to actually understand how, not only how to make a budget, but also how to manage my money well. Because first they were like, oh wow, I have $4,000 a month now. So because we had a fictitious person and they had to make a budget for that person, we're like, oh, $4,000, I can spend it right away. And then they started building the budget, and then at the end they were in the red, but by thousands of dollars. And so that's where they started to think, and they said it was very, very helpful for us, because I realized, I'm now terrified, but I realized that I need to actually learn more, because that's exactly, it's not so easy as I'm thinking. Yeah. So I think there is really that truth to it.
It's that fantastic moment of speaking as a parent, where your child receives their first electricity bill in their own house, and then you go, you see, That's why I turn the lights off, shut the windows, anyway. And it's like, oh, I'd never known. I said, yeah, So anyway, now they go around shutting my windows, but they saw that. So Ibrahim, our host, asks what I think is quite an insightful question, even though it may appear to be very basic on the surface. He says, is there a relationship between lack of financial literacy and low mathematical skills or education? Now, what I'm seeing in that question is the relationship is a correlation versus causation type question, because the numbers that you gave from your fascinating survey of the United States, I think ostensibly would appear that there's certainly a correlation, but that lack of education probably implying a lower income, probably implying lower mathematical skill. I mean, these are all components of the same demographic group or segment. To what extent is it possible to separate financial literacy as a unique thing or factor, causal factor, from just pure old-fashioned, not very good at maths, didn't get out of high school? Where is there a relationship there that you've looked into, and if so, what is it? There clearly is. So, and I totally agree. So there is a high correlation between, as I showed as well, right? The higher the education level, the higher the financial literacy rate. And that's clearly also has to do with people who are better at math, are also better at financial literacy or financial literacy topics. But what we do, so that's why we run regression. So we have, for example, we look at what are the contributing factors to all these financial outcomes that I showed you. For example, being able to make ends meet, or I'm planning for retirement, or also having rainy day funds. So we look at what are the contributing factors to all these outcomes, which are for us indicators for financial well-being. And we see that, and we can include there a lot of factors, right? So we include all the demographics. So we have in there, of course, gender, age, we have in there income, but also education. So we have regular education, and then we have financial literacy. And interesting is that financial literacy shows up as a contributing factor above and beyond regular education. So there is this, so it's not just that we can say those with more regular education are better off, have higher financial well-being, show higher financial well-being. So it can actually be a substitute to financial literacy. No, that's actually always what we see. So we can put both in the same model, basically, and we see that financial literacy goes above and beyond regular education. So it has really that added benefit to the well-being in the end. And does it have to sort of flip that on its head to say that would it therefore also be true to say that even if the people, the cohort in question, had relatively low academic qualifications, relatively basic financial literacy would make a tangible difference on their economic outcomes?
That's a good point. So you basically have education low, but spike financial literacy. And
I'm not talking about spiking it so they can, do a straddle and collar on a derivatives contract. I'm talking about they understand the concept of interest and budgeting, and these, which are not intrinsically complicated. It's basically addition with a bit of division and a percentage or two. It's not complex mathematics by any stretch of the imagination.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm just saying, but you would think, therefore, that you with a relatively small amount of secret sauce, you could change the outcomes quite markedly.
Exactly. Because the financial literacy, if you will, in my model, financial literacy stands on its own. So independent of what your regular education is or what your income is, we hold everything else constant or so. So that's why then financial literacy really makes that additional or adds that additional benefit.
And again, talking from a sample size of one, my 22-year-old daughter, who, I can't do maths, she says, but she knows how much everything costs. And she never goes, she doesn't have it, she's very canny with money. Very, I got on the wrong side of the trade with her the whole time. And yet she's, she says she can't do anything. And you go, well, you must be able to. So it's not directly in my sample size of one. It's not, it doesn't have to be directly related to, knowing how many dollars you got in your pocket and can I afford this is not the same as, what is a fraction or trigonometry. These are not the identical things, I think.
Exactly. So, and I think a lot is what we see when we teach it, a lot is also how you frame it. Because, for example, if I teach it in classroom and I have a lot of women, and then I get that response, oh, I'm not good at math. So I say, no, we're speaking English. We are not speaking math here. So you have to talk differently if people feel like I'm not good at math, because as you say, it's not math. Yeah, there are numbers involved, but it's not the same as trigonometry or something like that, right? So it's really how you teach it, how you convey the content, and I think that's very crucial. And we see that there is a lot of benefits to adjusting it to the audience that you're talking to, and really make it relevant to them.
Yeah.
And so because then the more also when I coming back to that example that I just mentioned that I did last year with the students here, the topics. So it has to really be specific to their needs. So in that budgeting, one person in that budgeting workshop, we had that the person also wanted to save for a car. And then one of the students said, I don't care about a car because I'm not driving. So it's not for us. It was more like an example of executing saving or showing saving for a short-term goal. Versus the person really meant it literally, oh, I'm not interested in that because I don't like to drive. So it really has to be very specific to the group that we are talking to.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. It's interesting. What part of, one of the things that I think all of us watching this and, in our daily lives now are subject to is financial scams, as they're called, is not just please give me your password, but the ranging from collateralized debt obligations to Bitcoin, or not that that's a scam, but get rich quick schemes, all the way through to things that just where the fees are hidden, on that borderline between illegal and legal, but designed to attract the credulous and the ignorant. What part of financial literacy, is that part of financial literacy is to have an understanding, a tool set for looking at things like that and going, hold on a second. That's a bit too good to be true. Does that fit? Is that part of it? That's my question. Sorry, I'm waffling.
Yeah, it's clearly part of it, because if you also think over the last year, TikTok exploded, right? And now it's playing, for example, a really big role in also changing financial education landscape, because there are so many young adults, bloggers, or I don't know, I'm not on TikTok, but basically bloggers.
But you are very young, Andrea.
Yeah, but not that. I'm not.
Maybe you should have a financial literacy channel on TikTok. There you go.
No, I haven't done that, but it's just like it's just like fascinating how many videos are showing up there, because it is something also over the past years. We have shifted clearly a lot online because we're stuck at home, but also then that we advocates who are now promoting financial literacy and giving advice on social media platforms, right? So it is great, and I think it is interesting, and it is important to speak to the target audience where they're at and where it is you can engage them. But at the same time, as you say, it is very difficult for the audience to assess quality and accuracy of the content, right? And that's a really, really important issue because, as you say, fraudulent schemes, scams, or also the spread of misinformation is really, really big, right?
Yeah.
So this is a big issue, and the problem is that it's again on the individual, on the recipient of the information, to actually figure out whether that source is reliable and to assess the content's quality or accuracy and also unbiasedness, right? So it is on the individual, but the individual has low financial literacy. So that's why we say always financial literacy empowers you also to figure out what information is the right information, right? And ask the right questions. So it's not just that, because you're learning, right? So I'm still learning. I go online and I want to learn about the topic. But if you have a little bit of that sensibility or sensitivity about the topics, because you have learned about financial literacy, then you're aware, or you're better capable of understanding whether that's a reliable resource, and then ask the right question. So also what we are teaching is, if you're going to, with your bank, for example, have an appointment, then asking the right questions, and knowing what questions to ask. Because of course we always have to learn, and there are the fine prints and everything, but having that knowledge that also counts of that financial knowledge. It's not that you need to have the answers to everything, but knowing what questions to ask, and also be a little bit cautious on not believe everything right away, and maybe go and ask and look at different resources rather than just one.
Yes. If it looks like it's too good to be true, it's too good to be true.
Yeah, exactly. There is exactly. There is no free lunch. That's what I'm going to do. I work in I work in finance, and you know that if you see any form of return that's over a certain percentage, you're going to go, now that's either a scam or it's really, really risky, because there's no way they can get that money for that. Yeah, exactly.
And you just know, that number is, I don't know, 5 on something, 7, but it's that's where it is. And anything more than that, you're going to you ask big, even that number, you'd ask, how do you get there? Because I'd love to know how you got to that number. But it's just a single number, and you just know it. You don't have to do any calculations. You don't have to look at anything. You just know. And, it'll go up and down with inflation and the interest rate. But it's so ingrained that anyone that's promising you returns like that, you just sort of delete. No.
Exactly. But you need to be aware of it, right?
Yeah.
That's the thing.
But it's not a very complicated concept. I mean, I couldn't calculate the IRR in a real estate deal if it came up and bit me on the nose. But if I see it's given me 18%,
then it's just like that's
like, so it's either it's a crook. You've got masses of leverage. Something is wrong somewhere. There's some heavy risk embedded in that thing somehow, and that's just the correlation between risk and return. Anyway, I don't want to go on that. Pandemic. You mentioned it towards the end. What would you say was the big learning from the pandemic in terms of I know that the research won't have been done yet, but give me some sort of anecdotal views on, do you think the pandemic is going to demonstrate that financial literacy, it provides a better safety net in times of severe stress?
So clearly what we have seen over the past year is that emergency savings, and even if it's just a little bit, can go a long way. And so that, we already see it, not just among employers, for example, who want to provide now more programs who are not just focused on retirement savings, because that's something that's promoted by employers quite heavily here, but also shift into short-term emergency, or as you called it, rainy day funds, right? To really build that buffer stock of savings that will help you shield against a future shock like what we have. And so that's definitely something that we see where people were feeling, oh, actually emergency savings is something that I need. Because what we have seen before is that people said, I rather, and I did focus groups about that. And they said, I rather save for retirement because I know retirement will come at some point, but emergencies, I don't know. And if I have to, and that was always the answer, because I was then asking, and that was around the $2,000 question when I did focus groups. And I was asking, yeah, but if you don't have retirement, if you don't have emergency savings, but you have to come up with $2,000, what would you do? And they told me, oh, I'll just work more. So work was basically their solution. So they were working more, were taking up another job over the weekend to actually buffer that and come up with the emergency amount that they needed. So it wasn't that important, especially here in the US, to people who have a buffer stock of savings. Versus with retirement, they knew, oh, I have to save because that's coming, and then I cannot really work, or I won't be able because I'm physically not able to work longer hours, for example. So that was something. Versus here, because the whole economy was shut down over the past year, that option of I work more, I have that flexibility, that was actually not an option anymore. So we see that people are really more interested in, oh, I need to have a buffer stock, because there is also the option that I cannot work more and I cannot come up with the additional money.
That's very interesting. We're sort of over time, but I got a couple more I want to put to you. So when you the latter part of your presentation about the implementation of financial literacy programs, I think, a relevant question for the Middle East is, should these be, for want of a better word, compulsory? I mean, tools of policy, i.e. the government should mandate, which I know is very un-American, but we're not in America. So, it is a top-down developing market. There is a high likelihood that the young people today will not have the same safety net that their parents have for all sorts of reasons. Is that something that people should be compelled to do, to learn, or just incentivize?
Mm-hmm. I think it should be mandatory. So that's what we are proposing here in the US too. So we have already 21 states actually in the US who have financial education mandatory for high school graduation. Mm-hmm. So it depends on, so that's basically the top-down approach. So it is mandatory, it is state-based. How it is implemented differs. So that's something that we are fighting, because in some states it's only a short intervention, say an afternoon, which is not as effective as if it's a semester-long course. So that's why kind of those standards need to be set in place too. So I think this is something you can mandate it, but then it should also have some minimum requirements, how it should be implemented. If you leave it up to the states here in the US, it can really change, which is also, it makes sense to me, because the curriculum is already completely full. What would you, and the teachers are overburdened. So what would you cut, right? And that's always the trade-off. Shall we include it, for example, in social sciences, or shall we include it in math lessons or so? So there is really that trade-off, how to implement it. But in general, I think just going from leaving it up as an incentive, I mean, yes, that is definitely an important push too. So we are also reaching out to parents or to students to demand it from, for example, from their schools. But I think it's not as effective as if it's mandated from the government. And the same is what we are pushing here, and we are still at the beginning for workplace financial wellness again as well. So that basically workplaces are required to provide a minimum wellness, we call it financial wellness programming. So sort of information for their employees, so to guide them through the different financial decisions they have to make throughout their entire life, there are things out there for retirement savings, but as you have seen, it's not holistic enough. So you have different requirements.
So final question, and I think I assure you this was not planted by our host, but technology and particularly things like smartphones and apps and AI, ML, nudging, what Ant Financial did with the savings payment, the whole of this idea that your personal financial ecosystem is on, a single device.
Yeah.
I mean, go back to my sample size of 2, my children, they have their cell phone and that's it. Car keys and cell phone. I mean, that's all that, I have wallets and, all sorts of old person stuff, glasses, pacemaker, but literally they run their entire lives, including trading, crypto, everything from an app or a series of apps. Do you think is that an area where there's a lot of work to do in terms of not just creating the vehicles through which saving and financial management can be done, but also nudging behavior, monitoring behavior, having AI and ML which says, look, your behaviors, you are not being very financially literate about this. Warning, warning, warning. Is that an interesting area, do you think, and one that is and will develop in the future?
Yeah, I sure do. So we did a lot of research on especially the young and their fintech use, and we also coupled it to their money management behavior. And we looked at, because I started off with my very own very own survey where I just looked into mobile payments. Because as you say, I just felt like, okay, now we don't even need a wallet anymore, a credit card. I already felt like credit card is detaching us from money, because it's not like, usually you need to have the physical money. That's how we started. That's what my parents still use, but predominantly. And I with the credit card, but now I don't even need my wallet anymore. I can actually go around with my phone and pay. So how does that influence my money management behavior? And what we see is clearly that those who use mobile payments are more prone to overdraw their checking accounts, for example. So there is really that
interesting,
that effect, right? So that people are less or more detached to their money, and then lose track and are more prone to overdrawing the checking account. But at the same time, we also look then, what role does financial literacy play in that whole spiel? And we see that those who use mobile payments and who are more financially literate are less likely to overdraw their checking account. So it's really, and of course, we look here only at correlation. So I cannot say that mobile payment is actually bad and it influences your money management behavior, because I just see that correlation. So, but what I see is that financial literacy has a crucial part in that users who use fintech are less likely to engage in costly money management behavior if they are more financially literate. Yeah. So my conclusion actually that I draw from that is that financial literacy and fintech need to be used as a complement and not a substitute.
Yeah, it's almost like an amplifier. If you're good at it already, it makes you better, and if you're not, it makes you worse. That's very anecdotal and not science, not academia.
Yeah, but my science actually shows that, right? So my research
that's good.
supports your hypothesis. But going back to your question, I think it is, technology is the way to go today. And I use my phone for everything, even for paying. But I think adding that financial education component is equally important than just giving the access and the quick turnaround, basically. So I just a complementary thing. But what I'm really saying is that you have now, for the first time, I think. I know. If a person is using a digital device to do the majority of their payments, whether that's tapping or on a bank account app, there is data on, and that person is creating data that they can then use to monitor their behavior, like you would with
a health app, that could, if, my Fitbit, my heartbeat goes up because I'm doing too many presentations on financial literature, if it goes literacy, if it goes dangerously high, it will start flashing at, not that it does, but it will say, do something about this. That sort of nudging from a data-driven application presumably is quite new and quite helpful, I guess. I'm here to hypothesize. You're the one that has the hard job of actually backing it up.
Proving it. No, but the data is still rare here, so I have to. So that's why I don't have a lot of research on that. But I have, when I talk with students, for example, we are also using mobile budgeting apps. And when I talk with them, they say, oh, it's actually good for me if I get a notification, it pops up, oh, you have actually spent more on groceries or on going out this month than you have done last, or you're over your budget. So I think these nudges really help to stay within your means.
Yeah. So your next step is you're going to go off to Silicon Valley and set up a financial literacy mega app, and which will no doubt be the word finlit, but with no vowels in it, because vowels are uncool. But and make a fortune, which I think would be a great thing to do.
I will be on board.
Excellent. Andrea, we've gone 15 minutes over. For me, it's been a lot of fun. I hope the same for you. I've learned a lot. I don't think you've learned anything, but we've learned a lot. Where can people find out more? What's the website? The website is GFLEC.org. So that's our whole website. We also have actually another website, just a side note, if you want to learn more about financial education in high school. So it's called fastlane-education.org. And that's our initiative where we promote financial education in high school. And we have a ton of resources there as well, which are more teacher-driven, but also for policymakers, how to mandate. So that's the other thing. We have step-by-step guide how we can actually mandate financial education in high school. So but our main website is GFLEC.org. Fantastic. And I'm sure that any of you watching who want to know more will be able to find out from the inimicable Ibrahim, who I'm sure will have that information as well. So before I say goodbye and thank you to Andrea, I just want to say that tomorrow the conference continues. I'm just looking at the schedule here. 11 a.m. Bahrain time. Where can households save? What's the ideal vehicle? So there are a couple of sessions tomorrow. Luckily for you, lovely audience, I will not be moderating either of them. So you've had the fill of me today. So I'm going to say thank you to Andrea for joining us. Andrea, it's been a real pleasure. Thank you. It was great. I hope we can do it IRL one day when we're allowed to get back on the airplane. To our audience, thank you for joining us. It's for tea time in Bahrain now. And thank you to Ibrahim and the team at Fintech Robos for putting this all together. I look forward to seeing any or all of you at some moment in the future. But until then, good afternoon, good evening, and thank you very much. Bye.